You can turn to the Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. We've come to a very important part in the Revelation. All things are important, but it's a very distinct part. Up to this point, we've been talking about the blowing of the trumpets, the seals that have been broken, and all the things that are progressing. Ending in chapter 11 until chapter 16, it picks back up with a chronological sequential order of the events that take place. But here in chapters 12, 13, and part of 14, God does something, Lord Jesus does something that's pretty unique. And that is that He takes time and stops and introduces you and me to the characters of the apocalypse. Now ordinarily, if you were to read a play, at the front of that play, there would be a list of all the characters who are going to be in that play and give a brief description. If you were to read a book, within the first few pages of a book, it's going to introduce you to the characters and help you to understand the description. Well, here in the Apocalypse and the Revelation, as well as in some ways all of redemptive history, we have gone all the way through this, and now Jesus stops and says to John, let me tell you about the characters of the apocalypse. Let me share with you the main characters of redemptive history. Let me help you to understand how and why all of these things are taking place and how eventually the end things will take place. Let me help you understand by identifying the characters. So here in chapter 12, you have 5 characters that are identified. In chapter 13, there are 2 more. And in the first part of chapter 14 will be the final of those characters. But we're going to focus in on those characters today and describe them for you. And I think if you really hang on to that, it's going to give you some insight into all of redemptive history and why things have been happening in this world and will happen in this world the way they do. But beyond that, I want you to hold on to the end. Because at the end, I'm going to give you some of the most important principles that you'll ever know or experience in your life as a Christian. It's a pretty bold statement to make. But you are glad, or you should be glad that you're here today just to hear those principles that are found here in this word. So hold on to that if you don't get caught up with the characters. Let's talk about these characters. There in chapter 12, verse 1 and following. And a great sign appeared in heaven, and a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. And behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems or crowns. And his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to His throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she might be nourished for 1,260 days. We'll stop there for just a moment. Let's talk about these first 3 characters of the apocalypse. The first thing is she's called the radiant woman. A picture of this woman. And she is clothed with the sun. Underneath her feet are the moon, and on her head is a crown that has 12 stars upon it. And she is in the process of giving birth to a baby boy. That is the picture. Now, here's the question. Who is this radiant woman? Let's talk about who she's not. In some theologies or theological studies, you'll find some of these that they'll say that she is the Virgin Mary. Well, that may sound great and wonderful, and we know the Virgin Mary gave birth to a son. But the only problem, when you read beginning in chapter 6 and verse 6 and then verses 13 and following, the experience that this woman is going to have, that she is going out before the wilderness and she's having to guard herself against the enemy, the dragon, none of those things happen in the Virgin Mary. So Virgin Mary is not this radiant woman, all right? The second thing that you'll hear people say is that this radiant woman is the church. That she's the church, and through this you have this coming, and this is the enemy, and Satan is going to fight against the church. The only problem with that is the chronology is not right. In this story, the radiant woman gives birth to a baby, to a child, a son, and we're going to find out in a minute that son is the Christ, is the Messiah, all right? Well, think about that in sequential order. We do not believe that the church brought forth Jesus, do we? The church did not birth Jesus, but what? But Jesus birthed the church. So this radiant woman cannot be the church. So who is the radiant woman? Very simply, the radiant woman is the nation of Israel. All right? She is the nation of Israel. And you really cannot miss that because of two things. All right? First of all, her description. She is described as the radiant woman clothed with the sun, moon under her feet, with a crown with 12 stars on her head. Have you ever heard that description before? Oh, yes, you have. Oh, yes, you have. You go all the way back to the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. You don't have time to turn there, but just put it down and write it. Genesis chapter 37, verse 15. It's when Joseph, you remember Joseph, the boy who was sold by his brothers into slavery? And do you remember why they sold him into slavery? Because they were jealous. And you remember why they were jealous? Because he had visions about what God said was going to happen to him. And in one of those visions, this is what he tells his mom and dad, his dad and his brothers. He says this. He says, in my vision, I saw the sun. I was on a throne, and I saw the sun bowing down to me, and the moon bowing down to me, and 11 stars bowing down to me. This was a vision about the fact that he is going to be eventually the prime minister over Egypt to save all of them, and all of them are going to come and bow down before him. But hold on a second. It describes those people who are his family as being the sun, moon, and the stars. Who was his daddy? His daddy was Jacob, but what was his other name? His name was Israel. Who was his mother? Rachel. And who were his brothers? The other 11 of the 12 tribes of Israel. So there you find the description of the sun, the moon, and the 12 stars representing the nation or the tribes of Israel. Pretty clear when it says the radiant woman that it is the nation of Israel. That's only the first reason. Second reason is because what she is doing. What is the description? She is in having a child. She is in the pains of childbirth. She is going to give birth to a son. But he's not just any son. He is a unique son, a unique child. Listen to what it describes him in verse 5. And she gave birth to a son, a male child. Listen here. Who will rule over all the nations with a rod of iron. And listen to what it says. And her child was caught up to God, to his throne. What's that talking about? It's talking about the Lord Jesus. What did it say in the prophecies? In the prophecies, Isaiah prophecy, Isaiah 9. Or if it would be the prophecy that Balaam spoke in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. Any of those prophecies that you want to read, this is what is foretold by Jesus. That Jesus was going to come and he was going to be a ruler. That a scepter was going to be in his hand. And whenever he came with a scepter in his hand, he was going to rule this world with a rod of iron, and he is going to crush the head of the enemy. He's going to crush the head of that one who is the enemy. That's what's foretold about Jesus. And therefore, this nation of Israel is the one whereby the Messiah or the Christ is going to be born and birthed, who is going to be the King of Kings and the ruler of all the world. And Jesus Christ is going to be and is that child. Right? Now, the other thing it says there in verse 5, you got to notice though, it says, and her child was caught up to God and to His throne. Whenever Jesus came the first time, He came, died on the cross, resurrected, walked among men for 40 days, was seen by His disciple and other people, and then what happened to Him? He ascended to heaven, and where is He now? He is at the throne of God, waiting what? Waiting until God makes His enemies His footstool. He is waiting there in glory in heaven. All right? There in verse 5. Description of the work, ministry, and eventually the ascension of Jesus Christ. So you have the woman is Israel, and this child, this male child, is Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ. But in the middle of that, it introduces us to a scary creature. A sign there in verse 3 appeared, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadems. Who is this red dragon? That red dragon is none other than Satan. Satan the devil. That's who it is. And it describes him in a horrible, horrible way. Matter of fact, when I was a kid, did any of y'all used to have that big Bible story book? You had that big Bible story book. I couldn't stand reading the pages when they'd show you that picture of the devil. Did y'all remember seeing that ugly old picture? Be a dragon-looking thing, and man, we'd read the Bible. I'd say, I don't want to look at that picture. I don't look at that picture because that's an ugly picture. Now, whenever he is being described, hold on a second, very important, listen to me. When he's being described by Jesus, by God, as being this red, fiery dragon who has 7 heads with 7 diadems upon his head and 10 horns, is that what he looks like physically? The answer is no. He doesn't look like that physically. You know what he's going to look like physically? He's going to be beautiful. He's going to be enticing. He's going to do everything that he can to be cunning, accepting. He's going to be what you'd think and picture to be the best person you could possibly meet. That's what he's coming. But why this description? Because when God describes him, he's describing his nature. He's describing who he is on the inside. For see, that's the way God sees us. Did you know that? God sees all of us from the inside out. He sees what's on the inside of us before he sees it on the outside. God is not impressed about what we wear. God is not impressed about how we look. God is impressed about who we are. And whenever he describes this dragon, this Satan, he says he is a horrible dragon. He has 7 heads. 7 is the number of completeness. Head is where your intelligence is. He is so intelligent, so brilliant. He knows every way to con you, every way to deceive you, every way to blind you to the truth. He has 10 horns, as Daniel says in Daniel 7:24, tying those two things together. Those 10 horns represent 10 kingdoms that will be turned over to him without war, turned over him to make him the ruler of the world in the person of the Antichrist. We'll describe a little bit more about that when we get to the beast who comes to the sea and the earth in chapter 13. But it's a picture of old Satan. Satan is this dragon. Satan is this enemy. And it says that whenever, in verse 4, says that his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. We talked about that a few weeks ago. That's the picture of whenever Satan rebels. His name was Lucifer. He was the anointed cherub. He was the greatest and highest creation God ever made. He was the most beautiful. He was the most powerful of all God's creation. And he was the anointed cherub. But whenever his pride built up in him, he decided that he wanted to be worshiped instead of God. He rebelled against the throne of God, and God cast him down out of his position as the anointed cherub. And at that time, the tail of that dragon sweeps away 1/3 of the stars. That's the angels. He takes 1/3 of those angels, and those angels go with him, and they become fallen angels, or the demons of hell, and demons that you have to deal with every day. Oh yeah, you deal with them every day, all right? They're active and they're working. Don't worry about it. If you don't think they're active and working, just try to live for God. Just get out there, make your life count, and live for God, and find out how much they will fight you and how much they will oppose you. 1/3 of them, it says, were cast down, but bless God, 2/3 of them are still the angels of the light. Amen? So God's got plenty of ministering saints for him, or ministering to the saints themselves. But look what happens here in verse 4. Very important. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. Wow. What is that a picture? It's a picture of old Satan. He's sitting there, and he's waiting for Israel to have this child, because he wants to devour that child. He wants to devour. Why would all that happen? Well, one reason it happens is you got to go back in all of biblical history and find out that one thing is Satan listens well. He listens well. He listens well to what God says. And he listens well to what you say. Matter of fact, he usually gets all the information he needs to how to defeat you just because of what you say. You give him all the information you need. All he needs, okay? So he listens very, very well. What do I mean by that? Well, let me tell you how he listens well. In the book of Genesis in chapter 3, when man sinned, God came and God cursed the earth, and he spoke to each one. He spoke to the woman, he spoke to the man, and he spoke to the serpent. Do you remember that? All right? And one of the things he said to the serpent, go back there in Genesis 3 and read it. This is what he said to the serpent. He says that you will constantly, the seed of woman will constantly be enmity against you. Your seed will battle one another. But that's not all he said. He said, and you and your seed will bruise the heel of the man, will bruise the heel of the seed of the woman. Listen now, though. But her seed will bruise your head. And that word bruise means crush your head. Did you hear what he said? He told Satan, you're going to be bruising the heel of man. He's been busy doing that, bless God, amen? But he said, hold on a second. Out of her seed is coming one who's going to crush your head. It's one thing to have your heel bruised. It's another thing to have your head crushed. Totally different, right? So he heard what God said. And therefore his first thing was he was set out to kill the seed of woman. To try to kill the seed. Why do you think Cain killed Abel? Why? Because Satan put in his heart to destroy Abel, because he's wanting to kill all men. He wants to destroy the seed of Adam, the seed of Eve, because that seed is eventually going to crush his head. Well, that's all right. God raised up Seth, amen? Then what did Satan do? Satan caused men to be so wicked and ungodly that God said he regretted he made man and destroyed them with the flood. A way to get rid of all the men, except there was a righteous man named Noah. And Noah and his family survived. And therefore, the seed of woman who's going to crush his head is still living. Wait a minute. He even listens beyond that. He was listening in when God told Genesis, in Genesis 12, he told a man named Abraham. You know Abraham, right? He told that man, Abraham, I'm going to bless you in every way, and your seed is going to bless all the nations of the world. Did you hear that? The seed of Abraham is going to bless all the nations of the world. Who's he talking about? He's talking about Jesus, right? Hold on a second. Do you know what Satan just figured out? It's not just through the seed of man that God's going to crush his head. It's going to be through this man Abraham. It's going to be through this man Abraham. Through his lineage is how that is going to happen. Well, Abraham couldn't have children, but God brought forth a child, miraculous child, the child of promise, Isaac, right? A miraculous child. And then through Isaac, what happened? Who did he have? He had Esau and Jacob. And Jacob has 12 sons. And Jacob eventually becomes Israel. And so in the midst of that, the nation of Israel is birthed out of Abraham. So it's going to be Abraham's seed. He also heard that prophecy there in Numbers 24:17. He says, and out of this seed of Abraham is coming one who will hold the golden scepter and crush the head of Moabites. He knows that's talking about him.
So what is he going to do? He's now got to destroy the seed of Israel. He's got to fight against the seed of Israel, so he does. He tries to wipe out every way that he possibly can. Isn't it interesting? Just one of those illustrations is that whenever Joseph, he goes over to Egypt and all of Israel moves to Egypt, but what happened when they got over there? They became slaves, didn't they? And they became so many, wait a minute, listen. They became so many that Pharaoh gave the command to do what? That all the male children, those who are birthed who are male, must be killed and thrown into the Nile. Why? Why? Because Satan is whispering in his ear, we got to get rid of those males. We got to get rid of those boys. Because one of them may be the one that crushes my head. Go back and read all of biblical history, all through the Bible. You find those experiences of whenever Satan is trying to get people to wipe out Israel. That's why they go into exile in Babylon. When they're destroyed as though they're going to be destroyed. That's why in the time of Esther that God places in the mind of Haman and Ahasuerus that they're to kill all the Jews. That wasn't that king's idea. That was Satan's idea. Because he's wanting to wipe out the Jews. If he can wipe out the Jews, he can keep the Messiah, the Christ, from coming. But he never wins. And finally there comes the day when the Virgin Mary is chosen by God to have a son. Satan cannot keep the Messiah from coming. He's here. But you remember what happens then? Read Luke. Read Luke's account. No, Matthew's account. Matthew chapter 2. When the wise men came and old Herod was king and he said, hey, tell me and I'll come worship him. If you find the Messiah, I'll come worship. They go to Bethlehem and worship him. The angel told him, don't go back and tell Herod. When Herod found out they deceived him, he got angry and said, send soldiers and kill all the what? Male children, 2 years of age and younger. Why? Satan trying to kill the dragon standing before Israel giving birth. But God already had a plan. He told Joseph to leave, right? God's always ahead of Satan, bless God. I love it. Whenever Jesus, for 30 years, though, sits in there and he's humbled and submissive, and then he's called into ministry, and he goes and preaches to his hometown, Nazareth. You know what Nazareth thought about doing? When you go to the city of Nazareth, they'll show you a cliff. It's called the brow of Nazareth. And they were going to throw him over the brow to kill him because of what he proclaimed. But Jesus walked right through their midst and never was touched miraculously. The Pharisees and Sadducees wanted to destroy him. They pick up stones to stone him. He walks right through the midst of them. Why? It is not yet time. It is not yet time. Satan tries everything he can. He even tries to tempt him to cause him to disqualify himself. He cannot win until finally and ultimately, on a Friday afternoon before a holy weekend at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he puts him to death. And he thinks, I have settled it. I've gotten rid of that Messiah. But he fell right in the hands of God's plan, for that Messiah had to die to be the Redeemer. But 3 days later, he comes forth from that grave, victorious over sin, Satan, and death, and he revealed himself, and then he ascended to the Father, and he is at the throne of the Father, waiting for that time when he will come back. That's the story. That's what this story is all about. Then you find in verse 6, very quickly, you find something called a prophetic gap. To really make sense of this, you have to understand what a prophetic gap is. A prophetic gap is when two verses are right next to each other, but between those verses might be a period of time. In verse 5, it talks about the birth of this child and the fact of what he did. He had the rod of iron, and that he was caught up to heaven to be with God. But then verse 6, it says, and the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she might be nourished for 1,260 days. That is a gap between verses 5 and 6 is the church age. That's the whole time we're living in right now. Jesus ascended. He's at the right hand of the Father. He's waiting for a time when He's coming back. And whenever He comes back, it's going to speak about what it's talking about there. It's talking about halfway through the tribulation period. Halfway through that tribulation period. And that describes that as 3.5 years. That's what that's describing, that many months. Those last 3.5 years are the great tribulation. And that's when the Antichrist is going to be on the scene and when Satan is going to wreak havoc like he's never wreaked before. And you understand why in just a minute. It's going to be the most horrible time that has ever been experienced in life. And the woman has to flee to the wilderness, but God's going to take care of her during those 3.5 years. Now, look at the next one of those characters, verse 7. And there was a war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels waged war. And they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, and the serpent of old, who is called the devil, Satan, who deceived the whole world, he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. We're introduced to another character. His name is Michael. Michael is an archangel, a mighty warrior of God. And now we're told that there is a war that is going to take place in heaven. When does this war take place? This war that's described here takes place in that 3.5 year mark of the tribulation period. That's when the war takes place. Now hold on a second. You say, well, I already knew that Satan fell. He was Lucifer, the anointed cherub. He fell, and that was even before creation happened. So what are you talking about this? Well, we know this, that even though Satan was cast out of heaven and he didn't have his right as the anointed cherub anymore, he still had access to God. There was a time of Job. He went up there and he talked to God about Job. He has his opportunity to come for that. He even is up there to be the accuser of the brethren. Right now, sitting before the throne of God is Satan. And Satan is the accuser of you. Whenever you sin something and you do something you ought not do, he's going to look at the throne of God and he's going to say, God, do you see them? They're supposed to be believers. They're supposed to love you. They don't love you, don't care anything about you. And he accuses you before the throne of God. Right now, he's doing that, all right? So he has access there in heaven, even though he's been cast down out of heaven. But hold on a second. This describes the final battle that's going to take place in heaven. Do you know what Satan does? Satan grows in his arrogance and pride so much that he finally is going to try to literally overthrow the throne of God. Overthrow the throne of God. Now you might say, how in the world will he try to overthrow? Because he is prideful and he is arrogant. And also, listen to me, because he has performed measures of success. He's had some successes on this earth, hasn't he? Oh, yes, he has. Let me name a few. What was his success? He deceived man, and they brought sin into the world. He didn't just deceive man and cause him to sin and bring sin into the world. He also took the dominion that God had given man, and he has it. He's the God of this world now. He's the prince of the power of the air. I would call that some measure of success. Whenever God gives to the nation of Israel all the promises of blessing him in that covenant, he continuously caused the children of Israel to live in depravity because they would not be obedient to God. And therefore, Israel never became all that they could become. That's not all. He is constantly, always in this world, blaming God for everything and making people believe it. Isn't that the truth? Every bad thing that happens, Satan causes everybody to blame God. When God's the giver of every good and perfect gift, and Satan does